Hi everyone, thank you for your patience. Let's get started. Good morning or good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the CyberArk APJ Partner Webinar. Today we have a very hot topic, and it's on the topic of adaptive. Happy to see many faces, familiar ones today, and I'm also seeing some new names today in our webinar today. For those I've not had the chance to meet, or for those I've not had the chance to meet before, welcome. Welcome to this partner community. My name is Jason, and together the channels team and Brian and James, welcome to this call. To get this started, I have a few ground rules. Brian, can I have the next slide? So first of all, for the sake of the speakers, so that we can have a good flow, we will mute everyone except for the speakers. And this session will be recorded, so we will get this recorded after this, as we go along, and the recording will be posted in the partner portal. And if you do have any question during this session, please key them into the into the Q&A chat. Sorry, not the WebEx chat. The Q&A chat, and we will answer any questions along the way. We do have 2 people in the team that is supporting us in this Q&A chat as well. Brian, can I get the next slide? So on the 13th of May this year, CyberArk announced the acquisition of Adaptive, right? And many of you would have heard more about Adaptive during the Impact event we had earlier in July, on how we are integrating and positioning the Adaptive solution into part of the CyberArk solution. So we have generated a lot of interest, many questions from the partners, and therefore we thought that we wanted to do this webinar to go a little bit deeper into what Adaptive is all about and how do we position that. And to help us to do that, we have invited 2 of our Adaptive colleagues who is part of the CyberArk team to share with us. And they are with us is Brian Krause is the Director of Worldwide Channels for Adaptive, as well as James. And James is our sales lead for Adaptive for APJ. So, over to you, James and Brian, for the session. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that warm introduction, Jason. Certainly appreciate that. And yes, today what we're going to do, talk a little bit about Adaptive, how we fit into the marketplace, and really why it makes for such a great acquisition and what Adaptive brings into the CyberArk world. First, to just give a quick overview, a little bit of a history as to where did Adaptive come from. We started as a product that was a PAM and IDaaS product owned by a company called Centrify, which is a competitor to CyberArk. Back in mid-2018, a private equity firm called Tomo Bravo had purchased Centrify and decided to do a spin-out as of beginning of last year of Adaptive as a standalone company. So for most of last year, we spent a lot of time doing some branding efforts, really getting the Adaptive name out there. And being owned by private equity, we were on the sales market. And as of May 13th, as Jason had mentioned, we were bought by CyberArk and now are part of the PAM space again. And fortunately, we are partnered up with the best and largest PAM vendor out there, CyberArk. So what I wanted to do to start off this conversation today is really talk about how we set the stage when we get in front of a customer. And in particular, we always like to start with a statistic, and we talk about the fact that 81% of all breaches involve a stolen, weak, or default password. Now, as most of us know, we're all in the security industry. Lots and lots of money is spent on security, approximately $130 billion or so. However, when we really dig into a lot of these corporate budgets, less than 10% is spent on IAM in particular. And this is where we have a huge gap, where all of the threats are going after passwords. However, none of the money is going there to secure it. And this is why we hear all about zero trust in the marketplace, and this has become so prevalent. And when we look at zero trust, this is really a concept of never trust, always verify. The question starts to come, why does this make sense for CyberArk to have purchased Idaptive? And the main reason is we have credentials everywhere. We have them in our SaaS environments. We have them in our cloud infrastructure environments. We have them on our on-prem environments. These are credentials for general workforce employees, B2B partners, consumers, customers trying to access various resources. And then, of course, we have privileged users, and privileged users are also employees. It's the same employees, just some happen to be admins, some happen to be, sales rep, whatever your role may be. And then, of course, we have the whole world of non-human users accessing via APIs. And this is something that, in order to really get a handle on, we need to be aware of multiple different user types and multiple different environments and have a true hybrid system. And that's what CyberArk's bringing to the table. Now, when we look at the general attack lifecycle, we have threat actors that are coming from inside our network or outside of the perimeter. However, that's a pretty easy thing to compromise. And as a result, everybody starts to become a inside the network user, and that causes us a problem, because what we start to see is as somebody compromises our various systems, they're going to move laterally from machine to machine, app to app, until they find an opportunity to level up their privilege and get to a higher level resource and ultimately take over the network. And this is exactly where CyberArk comes to the table of saying, hey, by consolidating identities through products like SSO, by layering on multi-factor authentication to make sure you truly are the right person accessing the resource, and really removing all of those privileged credentials off of the network, we can stop most attacks dead in their tracks. When we take a look at the broader CyberArk story, there is a concept known as a CyberArk blueprint. And this is really a framework of 3 guiding principles that we build all of our products based on. And this starts with preventing credential theft. It leads to stopping lateral and vertical movement across systems and the network. And then, of course, limiting privilege escalation and abuse, and being mindful of this across all on-premise and cloud products. And when we take a deeper look at this, this is where we start to really build out the CyberArk blueprint and lay out a nice framework where we can help our customers build a true identity practice. Now, as most of you know from being CyberArk partners in the past, you realize that a lot of this has always started talking about how can we vault various credentials, how can we start by protecting high-level resources. As part of this conversation, we also need to prove the identity, make sure that we have only the right person accessing the vault. And the way we do this is with MFA. And this is very much where Idaptive comes into the mix. So as we start to build out maturity across the practice, you'll start to see a lot of areas we can layer a true next generation access built on zero trust. Now, how we go to market around this is we start by verifying every user. This is using technologies like single sign-on to consolidate identities, generally to Active Directory, but this can be our own cloud directory or LDAP. We do this for our employees, we do this for business partners, and we're going to do this for consumers. Now, once we've consolidated those identities with SSO, we then are going to layer MFA on top of this. And this is a way we have true, strong authentication. Once we know who the user is trying to access an application or a resource, we want to validate devices. And this is really just saying, let's make sure that now that we have the right user coming in, we have a device that's a known device. This may be looking at a posture by taking a look at, do you have an MDM policy in place on your iPhone or Droid from Mobile Iron? Or it might be something so simple as just saying, hey, did you have MFA on your Windows login so I know that your machine accessing is actually your device. Now, once we know that it's you, it's coming in from a legitimate device, we then want to intelligently limit access to the various applications out there. And this is done primarily two methods. The first is role-based access. So based on your role, we'll give you access to various applications, which will populate in your portal. The next piece then comes into the whole idea of provisioning and lifecycle management. So based on those roles, we can start provisioning various attributes into your application so we can actually enforce true least privilege access. Now, part of Zero Trust is very much this concept of never trust, always verify. And this is about continuous authentication. So making sure every single time you access an application, you're the right person. Now, if we were to ask you to do MFA every single time you access an application, that would drive you nuts and you would hate that system. So how do we really introduce security and user productivity? This is done with machine learning and artificial intelligence. So we introduce user behavior analytics, and because we are aware of the various applications and resources you're hitting, we can look at 5 primary attributes of time, date, location, geovelocity, and device, and start learning a lot about your behavior so we can make access decisions based on risk. So as example, if I notice you always access 5 applications from your Windows machine, you always tend to be working from your home, let's say, and you do this Monday to Friday, that becomes your normal behavior. Now, you may have a policy that says you're allowed to access on Saturday. That's great, but I never see you access. So at that point, we're going to consider that a medium risk. And maybe when you try to access applications, we're going to enforce MFA every time you access applications until we start seeing more of a pattern where, you know, after 5 Saturdays, you're doing this behavior. Well, now I see this as normal, so we'll consider that low risk. Or on the converse, we might say that, hey, I see you're trying to access this 5th application. That's kind of weird, but you're now all of a sudden trying to access from just a location that's just way too far away and you're coming in from Russia, let's say. That just seems too odd. We might call that a high risk, lock down access altogether and send that over to your SIM for you to take some sort of response on that. And at the end of the day, that is really the framework that we go to market with. And when we sit down to talk to a customer, how we frame our conversation, because it then allows us to really dig deeper into the technology. The question that's going to come up next is, okay, this is great. How does this fit into the broader CyberArk portfolio? And this is what's rather exciting. So, of course, we all know CyberArk for doing privileged access management with products like Privilege Cloud, Core PAS, the new Alero products. However, there's always been this problem of how do we address the workforce? Of course, there's newer products like Endpoint Privilege Manager that are really going after locking down processes on workstations, but we still haven't addressed our general workforce user who is a privileged user in many degrees. However, we haven't found a great way to secure their applications. And in the past, we've always had to introduce other SSO or MFA vendors out there. However, recognizing that to have a true full IAM platform, we need to be mindful of privileged user and workforce users. This is why we did the adaptive integration and brought it all together as one whole platform. And then, of course, we have all of the secrets management for the API-driven stuff. As many of you are probably familiar with Application Access Manager, we can use API calls to secure a lot of those non-human accounts. But also as part of the world of DevOps, there's always a need to have a way to manage authentication engines. And with Adaptive, we give the perfect model in order to be able to do this. As for the actual Adaptive Identity Platform, we are a full SaaS cloud service. We're hosted in AWS, which is represented in the cloud in the middle. So all configuration, all product is running in the cloud. Users will access our applications by going through our service. Now, there is one piece that does go on-prem, and that is our cloud connector. And that's just used so we can actually connect the on-prem world to the cloud world. And generally, this is used so we can connect to a domain controller, generally Active Directory. Now, we definitely take a security-first approach, so we are not extending Active Directory into the cloud. We're leaving your Active Directory where it's at, and we're just sending some metadata via 443 into our service so we can make access decisions. Now, as part of having this cloud connector on-prem, or on domain, I should say, this also gives us the ability to do single sign-on into many of the legacy on-prem apps via header-based authentication. And once the system's in place, there's now a single cloud portal that a user can log into, and they have access to the cloud apps, your traditional Office 365, Salesforce, Boxes, apps of that nature, and all of the legacy on-prem apps that normally you'd need to hit via VPN. So we've removed that risk as well. As for our infrastructure, we are based on AWS. So we have pods all across the world. As you can see in APJ, we have quite a few of these, and they're very easy to spin up as new customer need necessitates. So we always have a very highly available, quick, fast, easy access with our system. And one other thing to note, we do have localized support with an office based in Hong Kong providing tech support, within time zone to help make things easier for you guys. The last part I want to finish off on just the logical overview of the technology is what makes MFA adaptive. And I think this is something that's important to note because we hear a lot of talk about adaptive MFA, the next generation of MFA. First and foremost, multi-factor authentication needs to have flexible authentication options. And within our product, we do just that. We give you the ability to load apps on your phone for mobile authenticators. We give you the ability to accept phone calls, text messages, use some sort of OTP client like a Google Authenticator if that's a better way for you. Or we can even do great stuff using FIDO tokens where we can get into the whole world of passwordless authentication. The important thing to note here is your users are a very diverse population. They all have different needs, so they need to have different authentication types in order to properly have easy access to the network that is highly secure. Now, once we have this flexible authentication, the next step is having policy and really policy based on context. So this is where we start looking at things and saying, hey, based on whether you're on network, off network, I'm going to have different access decisions. Based if you're running a machine that has an IWA client where I know your machine, I might want to have an easier authentication process versus some machine that appears to be a kiosk to me. Now, policy is great. However, you're never going to actually get a policy that fits all of your different needs for access. So this is really where user analytics comes and brings us far above and beyond anything you could do with the policy, and we start learning about behavior and making access decisions based on risk. Now, at this part of my presentation, what I would like to do is take you guys through a quick little end user perspective demo. We will share the slide deck after the presentation where you'll have these links, and this is something you'll be able to give a demo on your own. So what you do is you go to the link, and you'll see this is what our product actually looks like. So when you log in to the portal, you'll see it asks for a username, common stuff. We put our username, and it's only the first part of our email address. We don't have to put the @cyberark.com or whatever it may be. We click next, ask for a password as we might expect. And then also notice here we got this little area that says forgot password. Also in our demo, give you a little reminder there. So if you're giving that to a customer, but if we click forget password, this is where we can actually reset our password within Active Directory. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to put my password in. And here you'll see I have flexible authentication, so I can choose different types. In this instance, let's choose text message. I'll do that. Click next, and you'll notice I get a little text to my phone, and I need to click on that text, and I can choose to approve or deny. Since I know it's me, I'm going to approve. And lo and behold, we have logged in to the portal. Now, when we get to the portal, something you'll notice is, yes, there's a bunch of apps in here. Those apps were automatically deployed to me once it saw what my role is. And then I can also add some of my own personal apps. Now, with some of these apps, and this is all based on policy, so our company allows us to put personal apps, which is why I have Fidelity and LinkedIn in there. You'll also notice there's some traditional cloud apps like Office 365, Salesforce, but then we have on-prem apps like Jira and Confluence. So all of this is in one portal. We do have the ability to put it in the portal, or I could go directly to Salesforce, and if I tried to log into Salesforce, it'll just kick up the adaptive authentication screen. So I don't necessarily have to go through the portal. But if I do, what you'll see, if I click on Salesforce, it logs me in. Click on Office 365, it logs me in. And because we have seen that I've logged in from my home machine, it's not prompting me for additional MFA. The other demo I wanted to show you, just because this is very timely, especially in the world of COVID here, where we have everybody working from home, get a lot of questions about, hey, can you do MFA to VPN? And yes, we can. So here you'll see my Palo Alto Global Protect client. I'll click Connect. You'll see that it's the same user experience. So there's consistency across all points of authentication. So you'll see these same screens, whether I'm going to my VPN, I'm logging into a Red Hat server, I'm trying to get into my AWS root billing account, I'm trying to get into a Core Pass Vault or something of that nature. Same experience. Here we'll come in, we'll log in, we'll choose Mobile Authenticator this time. And here, this is a app that I can put on my phone, makes it real nice and easy. There's a pop-up, and with that, I click Approve, and lo and behold, I'm in. I'm now connected to the VPN. Simple, easy, super secure. Now let's come back to our slideshow here. And one area that I did want to address real quick, because the question comes up all the time, is who are your top, or who is Idaptive's top competitors? And these really are Microsoft, Okta, and Duo are the guys that we come head to head with every single time. Ways that we tend to differentiate against them is when we look at Microsoft, they tend to be highly focused on providing further Azure adoption. So it tends to be more single sign-on focused to the Microsoft environment. The MFA is very much Microsoft-centric, and if you're trying to bring in other third parties, it's just not built as well for some of that. Now, the world of Okta, they're very great at single sign-on MFA. They've been doing it for a long time. They're trying to get more into the world of privilege. However, they are not the privilege powerhouse that CyberArk is, so you really don't have one single platform that can address all of your different identity issues like CyberArk can. And then with Duo, Duo is a great MFA tool. However, they just do MFA. They don't have all of the IAM pieces of doing single sign-on, and certainly they don't do any of the privilege management pieces. So when you get in front of a customer, you start talking to them, you start diving into the world of identity, there are a lot of nuances as to how do products work, what accounts can or can't you cover. If you choose CyberArk, the answer is most likely yes, you can cover that use case, whether it's a privilege, a DevOps, SSO, an MFA, some sort of inbound provisioning. We cover that. You bring in the competitors, maybe yes, maybe no. You never really know. At this point of the conversation, what I wanted to do, I wanted to introduce my good buddy and our resident adaptive expert, James Byerly. And James is going to come in here. He's a guy who's worked all across the world at the street level, talking to customers both massive and tiny, about different strategies around identity access management. And he's going to tell us a little bit about his experience of selling Idaptive into the different marketplaces. James, with that, I'll hand it to you.
All right, thanks, Brian. Yeah, appreciate everyone joining today. And, this is an exciting time for CyberArk and Idaptive. This slide here is really giving you all an idea of some of our global customers, who all we're working with in many different forms, from Scotiabank to Toyota, Thermo Fisher Scientific. They have a big play right now in helping find a cure, I believe, for COVID and some other things. But then there's Shiseido. And what I want to talk about briefly is some of the use cases and some of these deployments. I won't go at length, but I want to give you all some food for thought. And one of them particularly is Shiseido. From a global perspective, they have over 30,000 users, and they were going through a digital transformation project. And part of that was converting their on-prem applications to cloud-based. So the struggle for them was, how are we going to set up the proper authentication for security? How are we going to keep our users productive? And how are we going to do this? And so they approached Idaptive, and we deployed our platform just for that very reason. So as those applications were being transferred from on-prem to the cloud, and they were coming online, our platform would stand in the way for authentication. So once Brian showed you how you logged in, walk you through the process. And so that user experience changes, right, depending on where you are, who you are. Maybe you have different access rights for different applications. So there's different ways that we can handle the authentication for those users. So the result really was, now their users can get to those applications quickly when they need to. They have the ability to reset their own password without having to call the help desk or wait on someone to get back to them. In other areas of the world, say, for example, the state of Massachusetts here in the United States, we've deployed over, I think at this point, 2 million users scaling for government-to-citizen deployments, including their 40,000 employees for authentication, SSO, single sign-on. So that gives you kind of a brief understanding of some of the use cases. I can go on and on for days. But what I want to talk about on the next slide is a little bit about kind of the entry point. Brian, can you advance that for me? Thank you. So a lot of times our customers are looking to deploy a single sign-on or MFA solution. They may not know exactly where they are in their life cycle and their maturity for identity. Part of our job certainly is to help them with that and help them discover the ways that they can tighten security, make things more efficient, and give an overall great experience for their end users. So it generally starts from a multi-factor perspective. And that multi-factor can exist, and Brian showed a little bit on when you're logging into your portal to get to those applications, but it also could be from that application direct. Like you gave an example of Salesforce, but there's also other devices and systems. For example, logging into your VPNs or logging in on your workstations to get that MFA experience, including the passwordless experience, which is now really coming online as a must-have as part of Zero Trust. From there, they are starting to look for more efficiencies around access to all these different applications. Because if you think about it, applications traditionally will have their own username and password, some of these cloud-based applications, and they may have their own native 2FA that allows them to do some level of multi-factor authentication. But what happens is you end up with more and more people having more and more sets of credentials, more and more types of authentication. Should I use my phone, or should I get a PIN code, or should I use Google Authenticator? So it gets confusing for the end users. And what we do is we consolidate that experience into one system and one application. So when they do use the mobile authenticator like Brian showed, that authentication is happening there every single time, instead of them having to do separate things in separate applications. So it's a single pane of glass to get to those applications, a very streamlined method for doing that. And as companies mature, they begin to look at other ways that we're helping. And I'll touch briefly a little bit on this, and it's essentially lifecycle management. the joiners, the movers, the leavers of the companies to be provisioned, deprovisioned into the directories or into other downstream applications. That's just another piece to Idaptive and what we offer. Some of these out-of-the-box snap-in connectors that allows them to quickly and easily set up provisioning and roles for their users. But most importantly, I think, too, is customers really want to be in control of the identities, where they're located. So Idaptive is flexible enough that we can adhere to your directory policies. Is it going to be in your Active Directory, your G Suite, or somewhere else, or a third-party jump cloud or something? So it's really up to you. But most importantly, from a security perspective, what we don't do is replicate your directory data to the cloud. Like Brian said, we're just transferring some basic meta information so we can identify those users within the profiles of Active Directory of Idaptive. So that rounds out the maturity and what we see from identity. And then in the middle of this, you're going to see user behavior analytics. This is the machine learning that's looking at your user's behavior, where they're logging in from, the time of day, the device, what's happening, and it's making decisions based on that. So if I'm logging in every single day, say from Seattle at 8 o'clock, but suddenly I'm logging in at 8:05 from Miami, something's happening, something's weird. The system's smart enough to make adjustments on the fly. So it can be smart enough to say, hey, we're stopping authentication altogether. We're not letting anybody in. Or it could be, we're going to step up authentication. Maybe something's wrong with this. We're going to step it up. But it's smart enough to recognize that device, the time of day, the geolocation. That behavior models get built as normal behavior, and when it's outside that normal behavior, it begins to make adjustments for that MFA, thus making you more secure. If those credentials have been compromised, we essentially render those useless without an MFA in front of it. But that's kind of where Idaptive sits from a product overview perspective, and I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Yeah, sounds good. I see we do have first question that popped up. I love this question. What do I think is the coolest integration with CyberArk? In particular, I think some of the MFA integrations that we have right now are starting to come to fruition real nicely. The one in particular that personally gets me excited is our integration that we have with Endpoint Privilege Manager. So for those of you that aren't real familiar with that product, what it allows you to do is enforce least privilege access on Windows and Macs. And in particular, what you can start to do is remove local admin access. And as part of removing local admin access, this is really a great way to just kill malware dead in its tracks, because when a malware fires off, it's always going to try to run various processes. It always needs to go to some sort of local admin access to do that. And then at that point, it fires off. Now, if we lock down local admin, there's always going to be the complaint of, well, what do I do when I have a user that needs to add a print driver, let's say, right? And especially considering we all work from home now, is adding a print driver kind of a use case is a very real problem. Well, at that point, we can allow that user to elevate their level of privilege on their machine. And at that point, we can enforce with Idaptive MFA and verify that identity, so we can all of a sudden enforce high security as well as enhance user productivity. So in my mind, I think that's the coolest integration that I've come across. Then I see another question, from Johnny as well. Love the questions, Johnny. Johnny asked James, or I guess James or myself, but James mentioned that there's movers, joiners, leavers. Is there an integration with some of the HCM tools? And I guess with that one, I can take that question most definitely. Yes, we do have the ability to integrate with HCM tools. So HCM, that's human capital management, HR tools. Think Workday, super big one, obviously. SuccessFactors, UltiPro, probably every single one of us on the call uses one of those. And what we can do with that, we can do inbound provisioning. So what starts to happen is all of a sudden HR hires a new person. They put them into Workday, let's say. We can take that role and user information from Workday, and we can automatically populate it into Active Directory. Now that it's in Active Directory, that's where we can start to do some of that identity lifecycle management, like is still up on the slide here, and then we can provide that user and provision that user access to their various applications. Then we'll get into situations where that user gets a promotion, let's say, or they move to a different department, as an example. Well, all of a sudden, automatically, on the fly, what we'll do, it will then update Active Directory. They'll get a new role, and they'll be given new access. They'll have old access removed. And then in the situation where they leave the company, we can automatically remove all access altogether. And of course, that's a big, huge security gap right there. I don't see any other questions at this point. So I guess, Jason, why don't I hand this over to you?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, James. Before we go, a couple of things. I do know that there were some partners asking me, the existing CyberArk partners asking me when you can start selling the adaptive solution. Here we are on this slide. So I'll get to that on the last slide, on the last point. But before we go, if you do want to learn more, the adaptive e-learning is already available on the partner portal. So if you get into the partner portal under training, there is a portion of that is dedicated to adaptive e-learning. So the URL is there as well. So go click into it. I personally went into that yesterday, and I saw many valuable training, not long ones, but short, good ones, valuable, good ones that you will find it useful. So do get into the e-learning page, and then you'll find a lot of training there.
Yeah, and in particular, Jason, just to add to that point, in the e-learning, so when you click on training in the partner portal, you'll see the e-learning. These are very much made to teach you how to do quick admin of the product. So anybody that would like to go out and download a free copy of Idaptive can certainly download a free trial, run through these videos. They're short, minute and a half, 15-minute kind of videos are the longest of them. And it'll teach you all of the different aspects of how do you configure that connector I talked about, how do you configure MFA policies, all the little bits and bytes so you can get a demo lab up and running real quick and easy.
Thank you, Brian.
No problem.
So for those of you here who are more technically inclined and you think you want a deeper dive into the technology, there is a CDE club. So Introduction to Idaptive is actually happening today, this afternoon, probably slightly more than 30 minutes from now. And JY and Waylun will be conducting that session as a deeper dive for the adaptive solution. Last but not least, to answer the questions of those partners who wants to start selling, what can you do? Certainly, we would would like for you to start talking to your customer, your install base, as well as net new prospect that you're talking to about our adaptive solution. If you want to have more, sales training, you have more questions, do reach out to your partner manager, myself, or even Brian or James. We will be available to help you, but your first contact would always be the partner manager. And if you are already a classic partner, CyberArk partner with a signed agreement, all we need you to do is to update the agreement to the latest, the 2020 partner agreement version that allows you to sell the adaptive solution as well. But that is on the back end side. But at the front end, just go there, go out there, go talk to your prospect, go talk to your install base. We will be supporting you from here or even out there to the customer as well. So with that, I will end off today's call. Again, this session is recorded. We will send out the recording to all the people who have registered. And if you do have any of your colleagues or friends who couldn't log in today, do encourage them to listen in to this recording. So on behalf of CyberArk, thank you, partners. Thank you for joining us. And on behalf of APJ, Brian and James, thank you for staying up very late your time. I know it's past midnight to support APJ. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Guys.